In 1868, Mrs. Catherine Ashford did something unheard of in Savannah, Georgia. She denounced her own husband to the Confederate authorities, but not for domestic violence, for crimes against an 18-year-old slave with green eyes like her own. The trial revealed that the young man was, in fact, the bastard son of the colonel's deceased brother, and what happened every night in that decaying plantation manor went beyond any law, divine or human. When the abolitionist lawyers arrived at Ashford Plantation, they found evidence that would make any judge in the South tremble: intimate letters written in shaking handwriting, a diary hidden beneath floorboards, and testimonies from house servants who swore they heard screams, some of pain, others they couldn't name. But what no one expected was that Mrs. Ashford didn't act out of mercy. She acted because it was the only way to destroy the man who destroyed her first. And when the truth came out, 13 people were dead, the plantation reduced to ashes, and the green-eyed young man had disappeared, carrying with him a secret that would change the course of abolitionism in America. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and write in the comments what country you're watching from. Comment where you're watching from. What you're about to hear, the history books tried to hide. The Georgia Piedmont in December 1860 smelled of ripe cotton and approaching storms. The heat was so thick it seemed to stick to the skin like molasses. At Ashford Plantation, one of the last great cotton estates in the region, Colonel Nathaniel Ashford stood at his study window, watching rain begin to fall over the cotton fields. Nathaniel was 50 years old, with broad shoulders bent under the weight of unpayable debts, and eyes yellowed by the laudanum he consumed every night to forget his empire was crumbling. Abolition approached like a guillotine. The Yankees pressed from the north. Younger planters spoke of paid labor, and he, the last of the Ashfords, clung to the past like a drowning man to a rotten plank. That afternoon, his overseer brought news from the neighboring plantation. Old Colonel Beauregard had died, and his estate would be auctioned to pay debts. Among the items, slaves. Nathaniel didn't need more workers. He could barely feed those he had. But something in the description of one lot caught his attention. Boy of 18 years, mulatto, light-skinned, green eyes, educated by the late mistress, can read, write, and play piano, green eyes, like hers. The memory cut through Nathaniel like a blade. His sister-in-law, Eleanor, dead of typhus 3 years ago. Emerald eyes that haunted his dreams. The woman he desired and could never have because she belonged to his older brother, killed in a hunting accident, and now, this slave. On auction day, Nathaniel arrived at Beauregard Plantation, wrapped in an English wool coat despite the heat. The hall was filled with buyers, all with sharp eyes evaluating human merchandise. The auctioneer, a fat man with a theatrical voice, announced the lots with the same excitement as someone selling prize cattle. When the green-eyed boy stepped onto the platform, the room fell silent. He was different. His light caramel skin reflected the candlelight almost ethereally. Curly hair fell over his forehead. His eyes, green as wet jade, fixed on the floor, but even so seemed to contain a disturbing depth. He wore a worn linen shirt and patched trousers, but maintained an upright, almost aristocratic posture. Lot 17, Elijah, 18 years, son of a house slave. The late colonel had him educated. Knows domestic service, reading, music, opening bid $300. Nathaniel felt his heart race. It wasn't just the boy's appearance, it was something more, a sense of recognition he couldn't explain, as if this young man carried within him something Nathaniel had lost long ago. 300, he said firmly. A merchant from Charleston offered 350. Nathaniel raised to 400. The room watched with curiosity. It wasn't common for a bankrupt colonel to spend so much on a house slave when what he needed were hands for the cotton fields. $500, Nathaniel called out, ending any competition. The hammer fell. Sold. When Nathaniel signed the purchase papers, the clerk handed him a sealed envelope. Private documentation on the slave, as per instructions from the late Mrs. Beauregard. Back at Ashford Plantation, it was already night when Nathaniel opened the envelope under the weak light of a lamp. Inside was a letter, written in delicate feminine handwriting. He immediately recognized it as Eleanor's, his sister-in-law. To whoever receives Elijah under their care, this boy is the son of my slave Dinah and Colonel William Ashford, my late husband, therefore half-brother to my daughters. I ask that he be treated with the dignity his lineage, though illegitimate, deserves. He possesses a brilliant mind and a pure heart. Don't let the world destroy him. Eleanor Beauregard Ashford, 1859. Nathaniel read the letter 3 times. Elijah was nephew to his own daughters, son of his older brother. Noble blood ran through those veins, even if society refused to acknowledge it. He tucked the letter into his coat's inner pocket and descended to the small room at the back of the main house where Elijah had been lodged. He knocked on the door. The first time in decades a master knocked before entering a slave's room. "Come in," said a soft voice. Elijah was standing by the narrow window, looking at the rain that had begun falling again. He turned when he saw Nathaniel, and for the first time their eyes met directly. There was no submission in that gaze. There was intelligence, curiosity, and something more, an ancient sadness, like someone who already knows all the world's injustices. Did you know?" Nathaniel asked without preamble. "About your lineage?" "My mother told me before she died," Elijah responded calmly. "Said my father was the only man who treated her with kindness, that he wanted to free me, but died before signing the papers." Nathaniel felt the weight of those words. His brother, always nobler, more just, had loved a slave, and from that love was born this boy with impossible eyes. "You won't work in the fields," Nathaniel said, "for you'll stay in the main house, take care of the library correspondence, learn what I can teach you." For the first time something changed in Elijah's expression. It wasn't gratitude, it was suspicion. "Why?" he asked directly. "Why would a master do that?" Nathaniel took a step forward. The lamplight cast shadows on the walls. "Because I saw your eyes," he said quietly, "and I remembered someone I shouldn't have loved." And with those words, something irreversible began. A bond that wasn't just of blood, but of mutual recognition. Two men trapped in a world of rules they both despised, though for different reasons. When Nathaniel left the room, he knew he had crossed an invisible line, and there would be no going back. The first months of Elijah at Ashford Plantation passed with a routine that hid what fermented in the shadows. During the day, he organized the colonel's vast library, catalogued commercial letters, and maintained accounting books that showed, page after page, the estate's imminent ruin. He was discreet, silent, almost invisible to the other slaves and to Mrs. Catherine Ashford, Nathaniel's wife. Catherine was 35 years old with a face that had once been beautiful, now hardened by years of silence and humiliation. She'd married at 17 to a man who never loved her. Given him 2 daughters he barely looked at. She knew of Nathaniel's vices, the laudanum, the nocturnal visits to the slave quarters when younger, but she'd learned to live with indifference as one learns to breathe underwater, until she noticed the change. Nathaniel, who spent weeks locked in his study drowning in laudanum smoke and melancholy, began emerging earlier, shaving carefully, changing clothes before dinner. And every night at 9 o'clock sharp he went up to the library on the 2nd floor. Catherine suspected another woman, perhaps a new housegirl, but when she sent a servant to spy, the answer left her even more intrigued. The colonel spent hours talking with Elijah, just talking. In the first weeks, Nathaniel maintained a safe distance. He sat in the leather armchair while Elijah organized books and began with simple questions. "Have you read Shakespeare?" "I have, sir. Miss Eleanor lent me her books." "And what did you think?" Elijah stopped, book in hand, and for the first time dared to answer with sincerity. "I think he understood that love is always a prison, even when free." Nathaniel fell silent. No one had ever spoken to him like this, with that mixture of poetry and bitterness. Over time, the conversations deepened. Nathaniel brought port wine, and though he never offered it to Elijah, social rules didn't allow it. He drank while they discussed philosophy, politics, Rousseau's writings on freedom and inequality. "Do you believe all men are born free?" Nathaniel asked one night, eyes already glazed from the laudanum he'd chewed before coming up. "I believe all men are born, sir. Freedom is something some are permitted to claim, others not." "And if I gave you that permission?" Elijah looked at him. "You cannot give what isn't yours to give." Those words should have angered Nathaniel, but instead they fascinated him. This boy didn't bend internally, even when his body was forced to bend externally. And this silent resistance, this unshakable dignity, awakened something dangerous in him, desire. It wasn't just physical, though. Elijah's body, slender, with precise movements, began inhabiting Nathaniel's thoughts, even when he wasn't present. It was deeper. It was the desire to possess that mind, that soul that refused to be possessed. One night in April 1861, after weeks of increasingly intimate conversations, Nathaniel brought a rare book, a French edition of Verlaine's poetry, banned in America for its transgressive content. "Read to me," he requested, handing the book to Elijah. The boy opened to a marked page and began reading in fluent French, simultaneously translating verses about love between men, forbidden desires, souls meeting in shadows. When he finished, the silence in the library was so thick it seemed solid. Nathaniel rose from the armchair and walked to the window, his back to Elijah. "Do you know why I bought you at that auction?" he asked, voice hoarse. "No, sir. Because when I saw you, I recognized something in you that I've spent my entire life trying to kill in myself." Elijah didn't respond. He waited. Nathaniel turned slowly. His eyes were moist. He didn't know if from the laudanum or something else. "My brother fathered you, but I look at you and see more than Ashford blood. I see freedom. Even in chains, you're freer than I've ever been." "Freedom is an illusion, sir," Elijah said quietly, "especially for those living in a gilded cage, trying to convince themselves the bars are of their own choosing." The phrase hit Nathaniel in the chest like a bullet. He took a step toward Elijah, then stopped, fighting himself. "If I touched you now," he whispered, "would it be violence or would it be something else?" Elijah held his gaze. "That depends, sir, on what you seek. If it's submission, it will be violence. If it's truth, it will be something else. But a slave can never offer true consent. You know that." Nathaniel closed his eyes. The lucidity of that response was brutal. "I don't want to hurt you," he said, voice breaking. "Then don't touch me," Elijah responded firmly, "because anything that happens between us, while I remain your property, will be tainted by that truth." Nathaniel stepped back, leaning against the wall again. For the first time in decades, he wept. He wept for the life he hadn't lived, for the love he never had, for the freedom he wasted choosing power. Elijah remained where he stood, but something in his expression softened. "But," he said quietly, breaking the silence, "if you were to free me, if I could choose to stay or leave, then perhaps—" "Perhaps what?" Nathaniel raised his wet face. "Perhaps I would choose to stay." Those words changed everything. It wasn't a promise. It was a possibility. And for Nathaniel, who lived surrounded by rotten certainties, that possibility was the most beautiful thing he'd ever received. He didn't touch Elijah that night, nor the next, but he began preparing manumission papers, hiding them in his desk, working on legal details that would allow him to free the boy without raising suspicion. What Nathaniel didn't know was that 3 doors down, Catherine was awake, listening to his footsteps in the corridor. And that soon, her patience of 2 decades would come to an end. It was a house servant who told, not out of malice but fear. Mary, Mrs. Catherine's chambermaid, had been assigned to clean the library one June morning. Upon entering, she found something she should never have seen. On the mahogany table, a paper bearing the Ashford seal. It was a certificate of manumission, not yet signed, with Elijah's name written in careful calligraphy. Mary couldn't read well, but she recognized freedom papers. She'd seen 2 in her entire life. She brought the discovery to the mistress, who read the paper with trembling fingers. Catherine didn't explode, didn't scream. She simply folded the document with deadly calm and stored it in her vanity drawer, next to the jewels Nathaniel hadn't given her in years. That night she waited for him in the study. When Nathaniel entered, preparing to go up to the library as he did every night, he found his wife seated in his armchair, the manumission paper open on the table. "How long?" Catherine asked in a flat voice. Nathaniel went pale. "Catherine, I can explain. How long have you been in love with that boy?" Her silence was worse than any scream. Nathaniel slowly sat in the opposite chair, feeling the weight of years collapsing on him. "I don't know if it's love," he admitted. "But I know that when I'm with him I can breathe." Catherine laughed, a sound without humor, only ash. "And with me? All these years by my side, were you suffocating? You know our marriage was never about love. No, it was about duty, family, honor, things that apparently mean less to you than the green eyes of a slave." Nathaniel clenched his fists. "He's my nephew, William's son. He has noble blood running in his veins, even if the world refuses to acknowledge it." "Noble blood?" Catherine stood, voice finally rising. "He's property, and you, by freeing him, will be confessing to all society what you feel for him. And is what I feel wrong?" Nathaniel also stood. "Is loving someone wrong? When that someone is a man, yes. When he's your slave, yes. When it can destroy our family, our daughters, our name, yes, it's wrong." The confrontation was interrupted by a hesitant knock at the door. It was Thomas, the overseer. "Colonel, forgive the intrusion, but there's a problem in the quarters. Elijah's been attacked." Nathaniel ran as he'd never run before. down the stairs, across the yard, to the small room where Elijah had been lodged, and found him on the floor, bleeding from a deep cut on his forehead. What happened? Nathaniel knelt beside him, holding his face with trembling hands. An older slave, Samuel, answered with lowered eyes. Some of the workers say the boy thinks he's better than the others. That he has the master's protection. They got angry. It was a lie, and everyone knew it. The attack had been ordered, but by whom? Nathaniel lifted Elijah in his arms, indifferent to the shocked stares of the slaves around, and carried him back into the main house. He passed directly by Catherine, who watched from the veranda, and took him to one of the guest rooms. He called the town doctor, Dr. Harrison, who arrived at dawn. After treating the wound, he pulled Nathaniel into the hallway. "Colonel, I need to tell you something. When examining the boy, I noticed marks, old ones, on his body." Nathaniel felt his blood freeze. "What kind of marks?" "Whip scars, but also others. Burns. Marks that, well, they're consistent with abuse." The world spun. "Abuse? The previous colonel had a reputation, sir. We all knew. He had preferences. And Elijah, with that appearance, wouldn't be the first boy who—" Nathaniel pushed the doctor away and returned to the room. Elijah was awake, staring at the ceiling. "Is it true?" Nathaniel asked, voice hoarse. "What William did to you?" Elijah turned his face away. "My father never touched me. He died when I was 10, but his son, young Master Beauregard, he didn't have his father's scruples." The revelation hit Nathaniel like a punch. Elijah's cousin, half-brother on his father's side, had abused him for years. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because you didn't ask. And because telling doesn't change what happened." Nathaniel sat on the edge of the bed, taking Elijah's hand, a gesture that violated all social rules, but in that moment was the only thing that mattered. "I'm going to free you," he said firmly. "Today. I'll sign the papers and you'll leave for New York. I have a contact there, an abolitionist lawyer. He'll help you." But before Elijah could respond, the door burst open violently. Catherine entered with 2 men, a minister and a Confederate officer. "Nathaniel Ashford," the officer said formally, "you are being accused of immoral conduct with a slave in your possession. Under the laws of this state and the codes of Christian morality, such crime can result in imprisonment, seizure of property, and—" "Who made this accusation?" Nathaniel stood, furious. Catherine took a step forward, eyes shining with contained vengeance. "I did, and I have witnesses. Servants who saw you enter his room at night, letters you wrote and never sent hidden in the library, and most importantly, she raised a small leather-bound diary. It was Nathaniel's diary. Pages and pages of confessions, thoughts, desires written down in laudanum-fueled early mornings. He didn't even remember writing half of it." Catherine opened to a marked page and read aloud. "I look at Elijah and see everything this world taught me to reject, but I cannot. God forgive me, I cannot." The minister shook his head in disapproval. The officer took notes. Nathaniel looked at Catherine and, for the first time, understood. She wasn't doing this for morality. She was doing it for pain, for years of abandonment, for a life wasted beside a man who never wanted her. "Catherine," he said quietly, "I'm sorry for everything." But she only turned away, tears finally falling down her marble face. From that night on, nothing was silent anymore. And while the officer arrested Nathaniel and the minister, declared Elijah as evidence, none of them knew the real storm was yet to come. Because 3 floors below, in the library, a newly arrived abolitionist lawyer from Massachusetts was examining the same documents with very different eyes, and saw in them not a scandal, but the opportunity the movement had been waiting years for. The lawyer's name was Benjamin Shaw, 32 years old, with fevered eyes of one who sleeps little and believes too much, and he was known in Boston as the most radical of abolitionists. When he arrived at Ashford Plantation 3 days after Nathaniel's arrest, it wasn't out of charity. It was strategy. A scandal involving a colonel, a slave, and accusations of immorality was exactly the kind of story that could turn the tide of public opinion. Benjamin knew abolition wouldn't be won just in Congress, but in newspapers, in salons, in people's mouths. And this case had all the ingredients: sex, power, hypocrisy, and a fallen colonel. Catherine received him in the parlor, dressed in mourning though her husband was still alive, imprisoned in the town jail awaiting trial. "Mrs. Ashford," Benjamin made a calculated bow, "I've come to represent your husband." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "He didn't request a lawyer." He doesn't need to. The case is already public, and public cases have implications beyond one family. She immediately understood what he hadn't said. Benjamin wasn't there for Nathaniel. He was there for the cause. What do you want? Permission to interview Elijah and access to the documents you used in the accusation. Catherine hesitated, then nodded. After all, the worse Nathaniel's situation became, the better for her. Divorce was already being prepared by her own lawyers. His ruin would be her liberation. Benjamin found Elijah locked in a back room, guarded by 2 overseers. The boy was sitting by the window looking at the cotton fields where he'd never work again. Elijah, Benjamin pulled up a chair, I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning. And Elijah told, not because he trusted the lawyer, but because he was tired of secrets. He spoke about the abuse at Beauregard Plantation, about Eleanor's kindness, about the day Nathaniel bought him, and for the first time someone looked at him as a person. Did he touch you? Benjamin asked directly. Not in the way they're insinuating, but he wanted you. Elijah was silent before answering. Yes, and I wanted him too, but nothing ever happened. He was preparing my manumission. Said only then could we, could what? Choose, without the weight of slavery between us. Benjamin wrote everything down, then raised his eyes, shining with the vision of something greater. Do you realize what this means? A colonel willing to free a slave to be able to love him freely? This isn't scandal. It's revolutionary. But Elijah shook his head. No, don't let them use this as propaganda. Nathaniel doesn't deserve to be turned into a symbol. He's just a man who was trying to be better. Benjamin leaned forward. But just a man doesn't change laws. Symbols do. And you, whether you want it or not, are already one. That night Benjamin visited Nathaniel in jail. The colonel was unrecognizable, bearded, dirty, with sunken eyes of someone who doesn't sleep. The lack of laudanum consumed him, causing tremors and cold sweats. I've come to get you out of here, Benjamin said. I don't want your help. This isn't about what you want. It's about what your story can do. I'll argue that Elijah is your nephew, that you tried to free him out of family remorse, not carnal desire, that Catherine invented a sexual scandal out of jealousy of another kind, envy of the attention you gave a relative. Nathaniel laughed bitterly. And Elijah, will he lie for me? He doesn't need to lie, just omit some truths. No. Nathaniel stood, despite the chains on his wrists. I won't let you turn what I feel into something shameful. If I'm to be judged, let it be for the whole truth. Benjamin sighed. Then you'll die here, you understand? There's no court in the South that will accept what you're confessing. Then let me die. But I won't betray Elijah by lying about us. That's when everything collapsed completely. 3 days later, a fire started in the main house at Ashford Plantation. No one ever knew exactly how. Some spoke of knocked-over candles, others of revenge by angry slaves. What's known is that the flames consumed first the library, then the bedrooms, then the entire colonial structure of wood and clay. Catherine and the daughters managed to escape, but 13 slaves who slept in the interior quarters died in the flames. And when firefighters finally controlled the blaze, they found a body in the library, charred beyond recognition, but with something intact in its hands. Nathaniel's diary, protected by the body itself. Everyone assumed it was Elijah, the slave who'd escaped the guarded room to seek something in the flames. But 2 days later, when they opened the preserved diary, they discovered a final entry written in shaky handwriting. Catherine, forgive me. Elijah, forgive me. This is the only way to end without turning you into victims of me. I die loving what the world commanded me to hate. N.A. The handwriting was Nathaniel's. The colonel had escaped from prison the night of the fire, returned to the plantation, and died in the flames of his own house, letting everyone believe it was Elijah who lay charred. But where was Elijah? The answer came weeks later when Benjamin received a letter from Charleston. It was signed with only an initial. E. Mr. Shaw, I ask that you tell Mrs. Ashford that her husband was the best man I knew. He gave me something no one can take away, the certainty that I am worthy of being loved. Don't use our story as a weapon. Use it as a reminder that even in the darkest places, there are those who choose the light. I leave for England on a ship departing tomorrow. I will never return, but I'll carry Nathaniel with me, in the only way that matters, in memory. E. Benjamin never revealed this letter publicly. He kept it for decades, until his own death in 1902, when it was found among his papers. As for Catherine, she sold the plantation ruins, moved with her daughters to Charleston and never again spoke her husband's name. But on the day of her death in 1895, the servants found something hidden under her pillow, a small photograph of Nathaniel at 20, still young, still not destroyed by life, and on the back written in shaky hand, "I loved you too, in my crooked way, forgive me." In 1920, 42 years after the fire at Ashford Plantation, a collection of letters and documents was anonymously donated to the Smithsonian Institution. Among them was Nathaniel Ashford's complete diary, Eleanor's letters about Elijah, and a series of abolitionist documents citing the case as an example of the moral corruption that slavery caused even in the ruling classes. A young historian named Robert Sullivan dedicated his master's thesis to the case. Researching in Charleston's parish archives, he found a boarding record from 1868. A passenger listed as E. Ashford, destination Liverpool, a surname he shouldn't use, but someone at the port allowed to remain. In Liverpool, Robert discovered traces. Elijah had lived there for 5 years working as a translator, then moved to Paris where he became a private tutor for aristocratic families. He died in 1924 at age 72 and was buried in Père Lachaise Cemetery. His grave, simple, bore only Elijah, free at last. But most extraordinary was what Robert found in the Sorbonne archives. Elijah had written in his final years a small memoir, published in French under a pseudonym. The title was L'homme aux yeux verts, Mémoires d'un affranchi, The Green-Eyed Man, Memoirs of a Freeman. In it, Elijah told his life, the abuse, the impossible love, the escape, and concluded with a reflection that would be quoted for generations. "I loved a man the world called my master, but in truth he was my liberator, not because he gave me signed papers, but because he looked at me as an equal when no one else did. He died, believing he saved me. He didn't know that we saved each other. He gave me freedom. I gave him the chance to be true, even if for a short time. And that, in the end, is more than most achieve in an entire lifetime." Today, the story of Nathaniel and Elijah is studied in American history courses as an example of the moral complexities of the antebellum period. It's not romanticized. It cannot be, given the context of slavery, but it's also not reduced to simple abuse of power. It's recognized as something more complicated, a desperate attempt by 2 men to find humanity in an inhumane system. Mrs. Catherine also gained her historical recognition. Modern feminists see her as a symbol of women imprisoned in loveless marriages who used the few weapons they had, denunciation, social scandal, to reclaim some power. And Benjamin Shaw, he became one of the most influential abolitionists in America, present at meetings that led to the Emancipation Proclamation. But he never forgot the case that taught him that liberation comes not just from laws, but from mutual recognition of humanity. In 2018, a great-great-grandson of Catherine Ashford published the complete family letters, including Nathaniel's final writings. The book became a bestseller and reignited debates about love, power, and the multiple forms of slavery, legal and emotional. Ashford Plantation was never rebuilt. Today, the land where the main house stood is a municipal park. There's a plaque. Here stood Ashford Plantation, scene of a story that time tried to erase, but that remains as testimony that, even in the darkest places, love, complicated, imperfect, impossible, still finds a way to exist. And you? After knowing this story, what do you think? Was Nathaniel villain or victim of his own time? Was Elijah just a survivor, or also someone who genuinely loved, despite everything? And Catherine, was she the cruel antagonist, or a woman using the only weapons she had in a society that imprisoned her as much as it did the slaves? Leave your opinion in the comments. Write what country you're watching from. And if this story made you think, if it made you question easy certainties about good and evil, then it fulfilled its purpose. Because history isn't about giving comfortable answers. It's about asking the right questions. If you liked it, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and share with someone who's not afraid to face the past without filters, because the shadows of history hide the most human truths of all. And sometimes in those shadows, we find not monsters, but people like us trying to survive, love, and be free in a world that made all of that nearly impossible. Nearly, but not completely. And that small gap between nearly and impossible is where humanity has always lived.